The rusty padlock clicked open with a sound that echoed through the dimly lit storage facility on the outskirts of Phoenix. Marcus Chen hadn't eaten in 2 days, and this mix-up with the inheritance paperwork felt like his last shot at finding something, anything, he could sell for a meal. The facility manager had shrugged when Marcus showed up with documents bearing a similar name, handing over the keys without much scrutiny. But as the metal door rolled up, Marcus's breath caught in his throat. Stacks of cash lined the walls. Military-grade weapons hung in neat rows, and in the center sat a laptop displaying classified government files that made his blood run cold, files he recognized from his days as a CIA analyst before addiction destroyed his career and left him on the streets. Someone had been watching the facility. Car engines hummed in the distance, getting closer. Marcus realized this wasn't just a lucky break, it was a death trap. The previous owner hadn't died of natural causes, and now whoever killed him knew Marcus had found their secret. But what Marcus discovered next would change everything and everyone forever. What could be so dangerous that it's worth killing for? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus's hands trembled as he stepped deeper into the storage unit, his worn sneakers silent on the concrete floor. The laptop screen cast an eerie blue glow across his weathered face, illuminating eyes that had once been sharp enough to spot terrorist networks from satellite imagery. Now those same eyes struggled to process what lay before him. The classified files scrolled endlessly. Operation Blackwater, Project Nightfall, names and dates that shouldn't exist outside the most secure government databases. But it wasn't just the files that made his stomach clench with recognition. The weapons weren't standard military issue. They were prototypes. Experimental designs he'd seen in classified briefings 5 years ago, before the bottle became his only companion and the streets became his home. A manila folder caught his attention, partially hidden beneath a black tactical vest. Marcus pulled it free with shaking fingers, and his world tilted sideways. Inside were photographs of himself, not recent pictures of the homeless man he'd become, but surveillance photos from his CIA days, images of him entering secure facilities, sitting in classified briefings, even one of him shaking hands with Director Harrison at his commendation ceremony. Below the photos, a single sheet of paper bore a name that stopped his heart. Chen, Marcus. Asset status, active. Handler, Alexander Volkov. Mission classification, deep cover. Deep cover. The words hammered in his skull like a migraine. He had no memory of any deep cover assignment. His last clear recollection was being dismissed from the agency after failing 3 drug tests in 2 months. The official story was simple: promising analyst destroys career with cocaine addiction, but as he stared at these documents, fragments of suppressed memories began clawing their way to the surface. A meeting in a sterile white room, needles, voices discussing memory suppression, someone saying his sacrifice would save countless lives. The sound of car doors slamming in the parking lot jolted him back to the present. Multiple vehicles, engines still running. Through the small gap between storage units, Marcus glimpsed 3 black SUVs positioned to block all exits. Men in dark suits moved with military precision, spreading out to surround the building. His training kicked in automatically, muscle memory stronger than conscious thought. Marcus grabbed the laptop and stuffed it into a weathered backpack he'd found near the cache. His hands moved independently of his conscious mind, selecting specific weapons from the wall display, a compact pistol, ammunition, and what appeared to be some kind of electronic device he didn't recognize, but somehow knew how to operate. A voice echoed through the facility's corridors, amplified and cold. "Marcus Chen, we know you're here. Come out peacefully, and we can discuss this situation like civilized professionals." The voice triggered another memory fragment, that same cultured accent speaking over him while he lay strapped to a medical table, unable to move or protest. Marcus pressed himself against the storage unit's wall, mind racing through possible escape routes. The facility's layout materialized in his thoughts with startling clarity, as if he'd studied the blueprints. But he'd never been here before today, had he? The certainty felt wrong, like trying to remember a dream upon waking. Footsteps approached, multiple sets, coordinated and purposeful. They knew exactly where he was. As he prepared to run, Marcus's gaze fell on one final item in the storage unit, a small digital recorder sitting atop the cash stacks. A yellow post-it note was attached with a single word written in desperate handwriting: play. His finger hovered over the device's button as the footsteps grew closer. Whatever was on that recorder had been important enough for someone to die protecting, important enough to hide away with weapons and classified files and photographs that suggested Marcus's entire life might be a carefully constructed lie. The footsteps stopped just outside the storage unit. Marcus pressed play and discovered that some truths are more dangerous than any weapon. The storage unit's metal door groaned as Marcus lifted it higher, rust flakes drifting down like snow in the dim morning light. He'd expected the usual detritus of someone's abandoned life: old furniture, boxes of yellowed photographs, maybe some outdated electronics he could pawn for enough cash to eat for a week. Instead, he found himself staring into what looked like a compact office from some spy thriller. A sleek metal desk dominated the center of the 10 by 12 space, its surface bare except for a high-end laptop and a strange device Marcus didn't recognize. Something with blinking lights and multiple antenna arrays. File cabinets lined one wall, their locks clearly more sophisticated than anything he'd seen in his construction days. But what really made his pulse quicken were the stacks of cash bundled neatly in clear plastic containers along the back wall. Marcus glanced over his shoulder at the empty storage facility corridor, then stepped inside and pulled the door down behind him. His hands trembled as he approached the money. Even from a distance, he could see these weren't small bills, hundreds, maybe thousands, more money than he'd seen in the 5 years since his life fell apart. He picked up one of the bundles, feeling the crisp texture of fresh currency. The bills were held together with a paper band marked First National Securities in neat typescript. Below that, someone had written a date, 3 weeks ago, and what looked like a reference number. The laptop was still warm. Marcus froze. Someone had been here recently, very recently. His finger hovered over the touchpad, and the screen came to life without requiring a password. A document was open, a spreadsheet filled with names, dates, and dollar amounts that made his eyes widen. Senator Patricia Hawthorne, $2.3 million. Judge Franklin Moore, $850,000. The list went on, dozens of entries, all from the past 6 months. A folder on the desktop caught his attention. Insurance. M.K. Marcus double-clicked it, and his blood turned cold. Photos, dozens of them, high-resolution surveillance shots of people in expensive suits meeting in parking garages, exchanging briefcases, shaking hands outside courthouses. But it was the final set of images that made Marcus stumble backward into the file cabinets. His own face stared back at him from the screen. Not recent photos. These were from 12 years ago, when he still wore tailored suits and carried himself like a man who belonged in corporate boardrooms. The images showed him walking into the Meridian Financial Building, the same building where he'd worked as a senior analyst until everything went wrong. Until Sarah died and the investigation and the questions that never stopped coming. Marcus's breathing became shallow. How did these photos end up here? Who was MK, and why did a dead stranger have surveillance photos of his former life? The sound of a car engine outside made him slam the laptop shut. Through the gap under the storage unit door, he could see shadows moving in the corridor, multiple people walking with purpose. Unit 247 should be at the end, a woman's voice said. Calm, professional. Remember, we need to be in and out before the facility opens officially. Marcus looked around frantically. No back exit, no windows, just concrete walls and the metal door between him and whoever was coming. He grabbed one bundle of cash and stuffed it inside his jacket, then powered down the laptop and shoved it into the backpack where he kept his few possessions. Footsteps stopped directly outside his unit. "This is it," the woman said. "Cut the lock." Marcus pressed himself against the side wall, hoping the shadows would hide him when they opened the door. His mind raced. These people weren't supposed to be here. They didn't have a key, which meant they weren't legitimate inheritors like him. They were breaking in, which meant they were probably dangerous. The sharp whine of a battery-powered cutting tool filled the air. Sparks flew under the door as they worked through the lock. Marcus had maybe 30 seconds before they got inside. He noticed something he'd missed before, a small panel in the back wall, partially hidden behind one of the file cabinets. An air vent, just large enough for a man to crawl through if he was desperate enough. And Marcus was definitely desperate enough. The cutting tool went silent. Marcus squeezed into the vent just as the storage unit door began to rise. He pulled the metal grate closed behind him as quietly as possible and crawled deeper into the ventilation system, the laptop's hard edges digging into his back through the thin backpack material. "Son of a bitch," a man's voice echoed from the unit below. "Someone beat us to it." "Check what's missing," the woman replied, "and find out who inherited this unit. We need that laptop back before—" Marcus crawled faster, not wanting to hear the rest. Whatever he'd stumbled into was bigger than unpaid storage fees and accidental inheritances, and now he was trapped in the middle of it. The storage unit's metal door groaned as Marcus pulled it down, the sound echoing through the empty corridor like a death rattle. His hands shook as he twisted the new lock into place, muscle memory fighting against 20 years of trying to forget. The briefcase felt heavier now, weighted with more than just cash and documents. It carried the ghost of Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell, the man he used to be before Kandahar, before the bottle, before the streets claimed him. Marcus shuffled toward the facility's exit, hyper-aware of every sound. A car door slammed in the parking lot, and he flinched, pressing himself against the wall. Through the grimy window, he watched a soccer mom wrestle storage boxes from her SUV while her kids argued over a tablet. Normal people living normal lives, oblivious to the fact that 50 feet away, a dead man walking clutched enough evidence to topple governments. The October wind cut through his threadbare jacket as he stepped outside. Marcus had grown accustomed to being invisible on the streets, just another homeless veteran that people's eyes slid past without acknowledgement. But now he felt exposed, as if the briefcase's contents had branded him with a target only certain people could see. He needed time to think, somewhere safe to process what he'd found. The abandoned warehouse where he usually slept was too isolated. If someone came looking, there'd be no witnesses, no one to hear him scream. Instead, he headed toward downtown, where the evening crowds would provide cover. The city library stayed open until 9 on weeknights. Marcus had spent countless hours there during winter months, pretending to read while staying warm. The security guards knew him, tolerated his presence as long as he didn't cause trouble. Tonight, he needed more than shelter. He needed answers. The librarian at the reference desk barely glanced up as Marcus settled at a computer terminal in the corner. His fingers, stiff from cold and old injuries, moved clumsily across the keyboard. Thomas Brennan's name yielded nothing in the news archives. No obituary, no missing person report, no trace that the man had ever existed. Either Brennan had lived completely off the grid, or someone had scrubbed his digital footprint clean. Marcus tried searching for Meridian Holdings next. The company appeared legitimate on the surface, a private equity firm with offices in Geneva and Delaware. But the deeper he dug, the more suspicious the gaps became. No employee directory, no project portfolios, no real information about what they actually did. Just a glossy website full of corporate speak about strategic partnerships and global initiatives. A memory surfaced unbidden. Kandahar Province, 2003. Marcus had been tasked with investigating irregularities in reconstruction contracts. Money that disappeared, materials that never reached their destinations, Afghan officials who asked too many questions and ended up dead. The paper trail had led to a maze of shell companies and offshore accounts, all carefully designed to obscure the truth. Just like Meridian Holdings. Marcus's blood ran cold as another piece clicked into place. The coordinates in Brennan's notebook. He recognized the format from his military days, grid references, the kind used for targeting strikes or marking locations of strategic importance. If those numbers corresponded to actual places, they might represent sites where Meridian had conducted operations, or hidden assets, or buried bodies. "Excuse me, sir." A gentle voice interrupted his thoughts. Marcus looked up to find a young librarian standing nearby, concern evident on her face. "We'll be closing in 15 minutes. He nodded, quickly clearing the browser history. The old paranoia ran deep. Always cover your tracks, never leave a trail. As he gathered his things, Marcus caught sight of his reflection in the computer screen. Hollow eyes stared back at him from a face carved by years of hard living. He looked like exactly what he was, a broken-down veteran with nothing left to lose. But that wasn't entirely true anymore, was it? For the first time in 20 years, Marcus possessed something valuable, something that people would kill for. The question was what to do with it. Walking back into the night, Marcus felt the weight of choice pressing down on him. He could dump the briefcase in the nearest trash bin and disappear deeper into the city's homeless population, return to the safety of invisibility and let sleeping dogs lie. Or he could dig deeper, follow the threads Thomas Brennan had died protecting, and risk everything for a chance at truth. The smart play was to walk away. Marcus had survived this long by keeping his head down and avoiding trouble. But as he passed a newsstand, a headline caught his eye: "Defense Contractor CEO Found Dead in Apparent Suicide." The photo showed a man in an expensive suit, corporate smile firmly in place. Marcus had never seen him before, but something about the timing felt wrong, too convenient. He bought the paper with spare change and found a bench under a streetlight to read. The article was brief, clinical. Robert Vance, 47, CEO of Blackwater Defense Solutions, had apparently shot himself in his home office. No note, no prior indication of depression or financial trouble, just another successful businessman who'd suddenly decided life wasn't worth living. Marcus folded the paper and looked up at the stars barely visible through the city's glow. 2 men dead in as many days, both connected to the shadowy world of private military contracting. The game had already begun. The only question was whether Marcus would play to win or die trying. The coffee shop on 5th Street buzzed with morning commuters, their voices creating a wall of white noise that Marcus hoped would mask his presence. He'd chosen a corner table with clear sightlines to both exits, the manila envelope pressed against his chest beneath Danny's oversized jacket. The photographs inside felt like they were burning through the fabric. He'd barely slept in the abandoned warehouse where he'd taken shelter, every shadow potentially hiding someone sent to retrieve what he'd found. The storage unit key hung heavy in his pocket, a constant reminder that his life had irrevocably changed in the span of 24 hours. Marcus nursed his black coffee, the cheapest thing on the menu, and pulled out the letter again. The expensive stationery felt foreign between his calloused fingers as he reread the carefully typed words. "If you're reading this, then I'm dead, and you're the only person who can expose the truth." The letter was signed by someone named Elizabeth Chen, a name that meant nothing to him. Yet somehow, this woman had chosen him as her contingency plan, her insurance policy against powerful people who had apparently killed her for what she knew. A bell chimed as the coffee shop door opened, and Marcus's head snapped up. 2 men in dark suits entered, their eyes scanning the crowd with predatory precision. They looked like federal agents or private security, the kind of people who made problems disappear. Marcus slumped lower in his chair, grateful for the beard that had grown wild over months of living on the streets. The men approached the counter, and one of them showed something to the barista, a badge or identification. The young woman behind the register shook her head, but Marcus caught her glancing in his direction. His blood turned to ice. Moving as casually as possible, Marcus folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope. He left a crumpled dollar bill on the table and walked toward the bathroom, keeping his head down. The narrow hallway led past the restrooms to a service exit that opened into an alley behind the building. The cold morning air hit his face as he stepped outside. He had maybe 2 minutes before they realized he'd slipped out the back, The question was where to go next. The public library would be open soon, anonymous, crowded, with multiple exits and security cameras that might deter violence. But first he needed answers. Marcus pulled out the burner phone he'd bought with some of Elizabeth Chen's cash and dialed information. There were 3 Elizabeth Chens listed in the city directory. The operator connected him to the first number. "Chen residence," answered an elderly voice. "I'm looking for Elizabeth Chen. About 35, works in finance?" Marcus guessed, based on the expensive contents of the storage unit. "I'm sorry, dear, but our Elizabeth is only 16 and still in high school." Marcus tried the second number. A man answered, confirming that his wife Elizabeth was a pediatrician in her 50s. The third number went straight to voicemail. "You've reached Elizabeth Chen. I can't take your call right now, but leave a message and I'll get back to you." The voice was young, professional, with an undercurrent of stress that made Marcus's pulse quicken. This was her. But before he could decide whether to leave a message, footsteps echoed from the mouth of the alley. Marcus pocketed the phone and moved deeper into the alley, using dumpsters and fire escapes for cover. The footsteps quickened, and he heard radio chatter, definitely security or law enforcement. These people had resources, organization. They'd found him impossibly fast. He reached the far end of the alley and risked a glance back. One of the suited men was systematically checking behind each dumpster while speaking into a radio. Marcus slipped onto the adjacent street and immediately blended into a group of construction workers heading to a job site. His mind raced as he walked. Elizabeth Chen's storage unit contained enough evidence to get people killed, but evidence of what? The photographs showed meetings between people he didn't recognize, documents with government letterheads, financial records that might as well have been written in hieroglyphics. There were USB drives, computer disks, and a safety deposit box key that suggested even more secrets waiting to be uncovered. But why him? Why would a woman he'd never met entrust a homeless drifter with information worth killing for? The inheritance paperwork had been legitimate. He'd checked that much at the storage facility's office. Elizabeth Chen had specifically named Marcus Turner as her beneficiary, which meant she'd known his real name. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Someone from his past had reached out from beyond the grave, dragging him back into a world he'd spent 3 years running from. The question wasn't why Elizabeth Chen had chosen him, it was how she'd found him when he'd worked so hard to disappear. Marcus ducked into a subway entrance, the familiar weight of paranoia settling over his shoulders like an old coat. Whatever Elizabeth Chen had discovered, whatever truth she'd died protecting, it was connected to the life he'd tried so desperately to leave behind. Marcus pressed his back against the cold brick wall of the alley, heart hammering against his ribs. The footsteps had stopped, but he could hear voices now, low, urgent whispers echoing off the narrow walls. He clutched the duffel bag tighter, feeling the weight of those damning photographs and documents inside. "Check the other end," a gravelly voice commanded. He couldn't have gone far. The beam of a flashlight swept past the dumpster where Marcus crouched, missing him by inches. He held his breath, watching shadows dance across the opposite wall. These weren't police officers or security guards. These men moved with military precision, their voices carrying the clipped authority of professionals used to violence. Marcus had been careless leaving the storage facility, too focused on the contents of that briefcase, too stunned by what those photographs revealed. Now he was paying the price. Somehow, they'd found him already. The flashlight beam moved away, and Marcus heard footsteps retreating. He waited another full minute before risking movement, slowly rising from his crouch. His knees protested. Sleeping rough for 3 years had taken its toll on his 42-year-old body. But his mind was sharp now, sharper than it had been in years. The fog of despair and alcohol that had clouded his thinking was burning away, replaced by the survival instincts he'd honed in another life. He needed somewhere safe to examine everything properly. The photographs he'd glimpsed showed faces he recognized from newspapers, senators, military officials, corporate executives, all meeting with the same shadowy figure whose face was partially obscured in every shot. The documents were worse. financial records, weapons manifests, communication logs that painted a picture of corruption reaching into the highest levels of government. Marcus slipped out of the alley through the back exit, keeping to shadows as he made his way through the industrial district. The weight of his old life pressed down on him with each step. 15 years ago, he would have known exactly what to do with intelligence like this. 15 years ago, he had clearance levels and contacts and the backing of the United States government. 15 years ago, before everything went to hell, he found what he was looking for 3 blocks away, an abandoned warehouse with enough broken windows to provide multiple escape routes. Marcus had learned to think tactically again, assessing angles and exits the way he used to assess foreign safehouses. The skills were still there, buried under years of self-imposed exile but intact. Inside the warehouse, he found a corner where moonlight filtered through dirty glass, providing enough illumination to work by. He spread the contents of the briefcase on the concrete floor, organizing everything methodically. The photographs formed one pile, the documents another, and the encrypted hard drive sat between them like a digital Pandora's box. The photos told a story that made his blood run cold. The man at the center of every meeting was someone he'd seen before, though he couldn't quite place where. Government officials passing briefcases, shaking hands with foreign nationals Marcus recognized as arms dealers and terrorist financiers. Timestamps showed the meetings spanning 5 years, right up to last month. The documents were even more damning. Bank routing numbers, weapons serial numbers, communication intercepts detailing planned attacks on American soil. This wasn't just corruption, it was treason on a massive scale. Someone had been selling classified information and military hardware to America's enemies using government connections to cover their tracks. Marcus found himself thinking about Detective Rodriguez, the only person who'd shown him genuine concern in years. She'd asked the right questions, pressed when others would have dismissed him. But could he trust her with this? Could he trust anyone? A sound from outside froze him mid-thought. Car doors slamming, voices calling out coordinates. They'd found his trail again. Marcus swept everything back into the duffel bag, his movements quick and efficient. The tactical part of his brain was fully engaged now, calculating distances and timing. 3 exits from this warehouse, front door, loading dock, and the broken window he'd spotted on the east wall. Thermal imaging shows movement inside, a voice called from outside. North corner, ground level. Thermal imaging. These weren't street thugs or hired muscle. They had military-grade equipment and the training to use it. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Whoever owned this intelligence had resources that reached far beyond civilian law enforcement. He moved toward the east window, staying low and using the concrete pillars for cover. The broken glass crunched under his feet despite his efforts at stealth. Behind him, he heard the warehouse's front door crash open. Marcus dove through the window as shouts erupted behind him. Glass shards caught his jacket, but he rolled clear and came up running. Spotlights blazed to life, turning night into harsh white day. He zigzagged between shipping containers, using every trick he'd learned in a dozen foreign countries to break their line of sight. The homeless man who'd stumbled into that storage unit was gone. In his place ran someone harder, more dangerous. Someone who understood exactly what kind of war he'd just inherited. Marcus crouched behind a dumpster 3 blocks from the storage facility, his lungs burning as he tried to catch his breath. The manila envelope pressed against his ribs, where he'd stuffed it inside his jacket, a constant reminder of how completely his world had shifted in the span of 24 hours. The sound of sirens echoed in the distance, growing fainter, but he knew they weren't done looking for him. His hands shook as he pulled out the photograph again. The younger version of himself stared back, clean-shaven and wearing a military uniform he'd tried so hard to forget. Standing beside him was Lieutenant Colonel Harrison Webb, the man whose storage unit Marcus had inherited, the man whose death had apparently been anything but natural. The memory hit him like a physical blow. Afghanistan, 2003, Operation Copper Ridge. Webb had been their commanding officer during what was supposed to be a routine supply convoy escort. Instead, they'd stumbled into something that officially never happened, a weapons cache that wasn't supposed to exist, filled with experimental ordnance that bore no military markings. Marcus remembered the argument that had erupted between Webb and Major Richardson, their voices carried on the desert wind. Webb had wanted to report the find through proper channels. Richardson had insisted they follow new orders that had come down from somewhere above their pay grade. The cache was to be relocated, no questions asked, no paperwork filed. 3 days later, their convoy had been hit by an IED. Webb had been critically injured, airlifted out, and Marcus had never seen him again. The official report listed the weapons cache as destroyed in the attack, but Marcus knew better. Richardson had made sure those experimental weapons disappeared into the black market pipeline that funded off-the-books operations. Now Webb was dead, and somehow he'd managed to document everything. Marcus forced himself to focus on his immediate situation. The men who'd found him at the storage unit weren't random thugs. They'd moved with military precision, spoke in clipped, professional tones, the kind of people who made problems disappear permanently. He pulled out his phone, hesitated, then dialed a number he hadn't called in over 5 years. Jimmy's auto shop. "Jimmy, it's Marcus." A long pause. "Jesus Christ, Marcus, where the hell are you? There's been people looking for you, serious people." "What kind of people?" "The kind that don't take no for an answer. They showed up about an hour ago, asking questions about you. Flashed some credentials that looked federal but felt wrong, you know. I told them I hadn't seen you in months." Marcus felt his stomach drop. If they'd found Jimmy, they had resources. Did they believe you? Hard to say. But Marcus, whatever you're into, you need to get out. These guys, they're not playing games. I need help, Jimmy. Just for tonight. Another pause. "The old safe house?" Marcus closed his eyes in relief. During his worst days after coming back from overseas, when the nightmares had been unbearable and he'd been drinking himself toward an early grave, Jimmy had let him crash in the small apartment above the auto shop. Jimmy was the only friend who'd stuck around when Marcus had lost everything else. "I'll leave the side door unlocked. But Marcus, after tonight, you're on your own. I've got a family now." "Understood." "And Jimmy? Thanks." The line went dead. Marcus spent the next hour moving through back alleys and side streets, doubling back on his route multiple times to ensure he wasn't being followed. The weight of the files in his jacket seemed to increase with every step. By the time he reached the auto shop, night had fallen and the neighborhood had settled into its usual quiet rhythm. The side door was unlocked as promised. Marcus slipped inside, climbed the narrow stairs to the apartment, and finally allowed himself to breathe. The small space was exactly as he remembered, sparse but clean, with a single bed, a table, and a hot plate. He spread Webb's files across the table and began to read. What he discovered made his blood run cold. Webb hadn't just documented the weapons cache incident. He'd spent the last 15 years tracking the network that had grown around those stolen weapons. Names, dates, financial transactions, it was all there. Government officials, defense contractors, foreign buyers. The experimental weapons had been just the beginning. At the center of it all was Major Richardson, now General Richardson, who had built a shadow empire selling military technology to the highest bidder. The storage unit contained enough evidence to bring down dozens of people in positions of power. But it was the final document that made Marcus's hands shake. A list of witnesses who had been systematically eliminated over the years. Soldiers from their unit who had asked too many questions. A journalist who had gotten too close to the story. An accountant who had discovered suspicious transactions. Webb's name was at the bottom with a date from 2 weeks ago. And below that, in Webb's handwriting, was Marcus's name with yesterday's date. They had been planning to kill him before he'd even known the storage unit existed. The coffee shop on 5th Street buzzed with morning commuters, providing perfect cover for Marcus to blend into the crowd. He'd chosen a corner table with clear sight lines to both entrances, the laptop positioned so he could monitor the room while working. 3 days had passed since his narrow escape from the warehouse, and every shadow still made his pulse spike. The encrypted files from Elena Vasquez's drive had revealed more than he'd bargained for. Financial records traced a web of shell companies funneling money through offshore accounts. Names appeared repeatedly: politicians, CEOs, judges, all connected to something called the Meridian Group. But it was the photographs that made his blood run cold. Marcus recognized faces from news broadcasts: Senator William Haycraft, who'd championed anti-corruption legislation; District Attorney Patricia Voss, known for her tough stance on organized crime; tech mogul David Chen, whose company had just won a massive government contract. All of them pictured at what appeared to be private meetings, shaking hands with men Marcus didn't recognize but whose expensive suits and predatory smiles suggested they weren't selling insurance. A shadow fell across his table. Marcus's hand instinctively moved toward the knife in his jacket, but he forced himself to look up casually. "Mind if I sit?" The woman was maybe 40, with graying auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore jeans and a worn leather jacket. Nothing that screamed law enforcement, but Marcus had learned to read people during his years on the streets. She carried herself like someone accustomed to authority. Depends on who's asking. She slid into the opposite chair without waiting for permission. "Detective Sarah Chen, Seattle PD, and before you bolt, I'm not here officially." She kept her voice low, eyes scanning the room. "Elena Vasquez was my partner." Marcus felt the familiar urge to run, but something in her voice stopped him. Grief, maybe, or anger barely held in check. "Don't know anyone by that name." "Cut the shit, Marcus. Or do you prefer Thompson? That was your name before, wasn't it? Back when you worked private security for Morrison Industries?" The coffee in Marcus's mouth turned bitter. Morrison Industries, a name he'd spent 5 years trying to forget. "You've got me confused with someone else." Detective Chen leaned forward. "Elena was investigating Morrison's connection to the Meridian Group when she was killed. 3 bullets to the head, made to look like a robbery gone wrong, except nothing was taken." She paused, watching his face. She'd been tracking unusual activity around certain storage facilities. "Guess whose unit number showed up in her notes?" Marcus closed the laptop slowly. "What do you want?" "The same thing Elena wanted. Justice. The Meridian Group has been operating in this city for over a decade, buying influence, eliminating problems. My partner got too close, so they silenced her." Chen's voice hardened. "But they made a mistake. They don't know about you yet. You're assuming I have something they want. I'm assuming you're not stupid enough to meet me here, unless you knew exactly what Elena died for." She slid a photograph across the table. "Recognize him?" Marcus's throat tightened. The man in the photo was older now, silver-haired and wearing an expensive suit, but those cold blue eyes were unmistakable. Richard Morrison, his former employer, the man who destroyed his life and reputation when Marcus had discovered Morrison's side business laundering money for criminal organizations. "Meridian Group's current chairman," Chen continued. "He's been building a network of corrupted officials for years, using blackmail, bribes, whatever it takes. Elena found evidence of a major operation going down next week, something big enough that they killed her to keep it quiet." Marcus remembered the encrypted calendar file he'd found, marked only with coordinates and a date. Next Friday. He'd dismissed it as meaningless, but now, "What makes you think I'll help you? Last time I tried to be a good citizen, I lost everything. My job, my reputation, my family. Because this time, you're not alone." Chen leaned back. "Elena wasn't the only honest cop in this city. We've been building our own network, staying off the radar, gathering evidence. But we need proof of Morrison's direct involvement, something that will stick in court. And you think I have that?" "I think Elena died believing you might." She stood, dropping a business card on the table. "She wrote your name in her personal notes, along with a message: 'He knows where the bodies are buried.'" Marcus stared at the card as Chen walked away. The phrase hit too close to home, literally. He did know where bodies were buried, had helped Morrison's people dispose of problems that couldn't be solved with money. That knowledge had made him a liability 5 years ago, forcing him to disappear rather than face Morrison's version of retirement. Now it seemed the past had found him anyway, wrapped in a dead woman's storage unit and delivered by her grieving partner. Marcus pocketed the card and gathered his things. Time to find out exactly what Elena Vasquez had been planning and whether her death might finally give him the ammunition to bring down Richard Morrison. The abandoned warehouse on the east side smelled like rust and broken dreams. Marcus pressed himself against a concrete pillar, clutching the duffel bag that contained his entire world now. The flash drives, the documents, and the evidence that had turned him from invisible homeless man to the most hunted person in the city. 3 days had passed since the shootout at the motel. 3 days of moving through shadows, sleeping in doorways for no more than an hour at a time, always listening for footsteps that might belong to Elena's people or whoever else wanted what he'd found in storage unit 247. His phone, the burner Elena had given him, buzzed once. A text message from an unknown number: "We need to talk, come alone. Pier 19 midnight, a friend of Sarah's." Sarah. The name hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't heard it spoken aloud in 15 years, hadn't allowed himself to think it, except in the darkest moments when whiskey couldn't quite silence his memories. Sarah Chen, the investigative journalist who'd been his partner in more ways than one. Sarah, who died because of information she'd been pursuing. Information that, Marcus now realized with growing horror, might be connected to what he'd inherited from a dead stranger's storage unit. The warehouse fell silent, except for the distant hum of traffic. Marcus checked his watch. 11:30 p.m. Pier 19 was a 20-minute walk if he stayed in the shadows, longer if he took the safer route through the tunnel system he'd learned during his years on the streets. He chose the tunnels. The maintenance passages beneath the city were a world unto themselves, populated by those society had forgotten and a few who chose to be forgotten. Marcus had spent 2 winters down here when the shelters were full or when his nightmares made him too dangerous to sleep around others. The tunnels remembered him, and he remembered their secrets. 20 minutes later, he emerged from a storm drain 3 blocks from the pier. The night air carried the smell of salt and diesel fuel from the harbor. Pier 19 stretched into the darkness like a finger pointing towards secrets he wasn't sure he wanted to uncover. A figure waited at the end of the pier, a woman, small and compact, wearing a dark jacket that billowed in the harbor wind. As Marcus approached, she turned, and he saw Asian features, short black hair and eyes that seemed familiar, even though he was certain they'd never met. "You're Marcus Webb," she said. It wasn't a question. "Depends who's asking. Lisa Chen. Sarah was my sister." The words stopped him cold. Sarah had mentioned a younger sister, a college student studying computer science. That would make this woman early 30s now, about the right age. But 15 years could change a person in ways that went deeper than appearance. "Sarah's dead," Marcus said carefully, "because of what she was investigating. The same thing you're carrying in that bag." Lisa's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "The same thing that got Harold Fitzgerald killed." "You know about Fitzgerald?" "I've been tracking this story for 15 years, ever since Sarah died. She left me notes, names, fragments of the investigation she was pursuing when they killed her." Lisa stepped closer, and Marcus could see the resemblance now. The same determined set of the jaw, the same fearless curiosity that had made Sarah both brilliant and vulnerable. "I became a forensic accountant specifically to finish what she started." Marcus felt the weight of the duffel bag pressing against his shoulder. What exactly did she start? Project Lazarus, a joint operation between certain elements of the intelligence community and private military contractors. They were moving money, hundreds of millions, through shell companies and offshore accounts, funding operations that weren't officially sanctioned. Lisa's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Sarah had found the financial records, the real accounting. She was going to expose the whole network, and they killed her for it. Made it look like a robbery gone wrong. But she'd hidden copies of everything, insurance policies scattered across the city. Fitzgerald was one of her contacts, a low-level accountant who was supposed to keep part of the evidence safe. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Storage Unit 247. Sarah rented it under a false name, paid the fees through an automated account. When Fitzgerald died, the unit defaulted to him through a legal arrangement she'd set up. She never expected the bureaucracy to randomly assign it to someone else when the fees got mixed up. Marcus stared out at the dark water, processing the implications. So, I inherited your sister's death warrant. You inherited the means to finally finish what she started. Those flash drives contain the complete financial records of Project Lazarus, including current operations. The people trying to kill you aren't just covering up old crimes, they're protecting active ones. A sound echoed across the water, the low rumble of boat engines approaching the pier. Lisa grabbed Marcus's arm. We need to go, now. But it was already too late. Spotlights blazed to life, turning night into harsh day, and Marcus realized that Sarah Chen's story was far from over. The abandoned warehouse felt like a tomb in the pre-dawn darkness. Marcus pressed himself against the cold brick wall, listening for any sign of movement inside. The Volkov documents burned against his chest where he'd tucked them inside his jacket, and the memory stick felt heavy in his pocket, despite weighing almost nothing. 3 hours had passed since he'd fled the motel. 3 hours of moving through shadows, doubling back, using every trick he'd learned during his years on the streets and before that, in places he tried not to remember. The men hunting him were professionals, but Marcus had advantages they didn't expect: desperation and intimate knowledge of the city's forgotten spaces. He'd chosen this warehouse carefully. Abandoned for 2 years after a fire gutted the upper floors, it sat in an industrial district where security cameras were sparse and foot traffic non-existent. More importantly, it had multiple exits and a maze-like interior that would favor someone who knew how to disappear. Marcus slipped through a gap in the chain-link fence and approached the building's rear entrance. The door hung slightly ajar, its lock long since broken by urban explorers and squatters. He paused, every sense alert, then stepped inside. The smell hit him immediately: rust, decay, and something else. Something that made his blood run cold. Fresh cigarette smoke. Marcus froze, his hand instinctively moving toward the knife at his belt. Someone was here, or had been here very recently. A soft scraping sound echoed from deeper in the building, footsteps on broken concrete. He had 2 choices: run or confront whoever was waiting for him. Running had kept him alive so far, but he was tired of being prey. And something about the deliberate nature of the sound suggested this wasn't random. Someone wanted him to know they were here. Marcus moved forward, staying low, using the scattered debris and burned machinery as cover. The warehouse floor opened into a vast space crisscrossed with support beams and filled with the skeletal remains of industrial equipment. Pale light filtered through broken windows 30 feet above, creating a patchwork of shadows. "I know you're there, Marcus." The voice made him stop breathing. Female, cultured, with the faintest trace of an accent he couldn't place. Not one of Volkov's thugs. "I'm not armed," the voice continued, "and I'm not here to hurt you, but we need to talk." Marcus remained silent, scanning the darkness for the source of the voice. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, the acoustics of the cavernous space making it impossible to pinpoint. "My name is Elena Vasquez. I worked with David Chen." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. David Chen, the man whose storage unit he'd inherited, the man whose death had started this nightmare. "I know you don't trust anyone right now," Elena continued. "I know Viktor Volkov's people are hunting you. I know because they've been hunting me too." A figure stepped into view 30 yards away, emerging from behind a massive concrete pillar. Even at this distance, Marcus could see she was small, dark-haired, wearing a long coat that looked expensive but practical. Her hands were visible, empty. "David was my partner," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the space. "Not romantically, professionally. We were investigating Volkov's operation together. Marcus felt the pieces shifting in his mind like fragments of a puzzle. "You're a cop," was. Federal prosecutor, actually. Until I got too close to something very powerful people wanted to stay buried. She took a step forward, and Marcus tensed, ready to run. "The documents you found," Elena said. "They're not just evidence of Volkov's crimes, they're proof of something much bigger, a network that reaches into the highest levels of government, law enforcement, even the Justice Department where I used to work. Why should I trust you? Because I'm the only person who can help you stay alive long enough to use what you found. And because David died getting those documents to someone who could act on them. That someone was supposed to be me." Marcus studied her, weighing his options. Every instinct told him to run, to trust no one. But he was exhausted, outgunned, and out of ideas. And there was something in her voice, pain, determination, loss, that felt genuine. "How do I know you're not working for them?" Elena reached slowly into her coat and pulled out a photograph. She placed it on a piece of debris between them and stepped back. Marcus approached cautiously and picked up the photo. It showed Elena and a man he recognized from the storage unit documents, David Chen. They were standing in front of what looked like a courthouse, both smiling, both wearing the confident expressions of people who believed justice was possible. "David trusted me," Elena said quietly. "I'm asking you to do the same. Because if we don't work together, Volkov wins. And a lot of innocent people die." Marcus looked at the photograph, then at the woman standing in the shadows. The weight of the documents against his chest seemed to grow heavier. "What do you want me to do?" The abandoned warehouse smelled of rust and decay, but Marcus felt safer here than he had in days. He'd found this place, 3 blocks from the river, its broken windows offering multiple escape routes and clear sightlines of approaching vehicles. The documents from the storage unit lay spread across a warped wooden crate, each page representing another piece of a puzzle that seemed determined to destroy him. Sarah sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, her laptop balanced on her knees, the screen's glow casting harsh shadows across her face. She'd been quiet for the past hour, methodically cross-referencing names and dates from the files with her own research. Marcus watched her work, still struggling to believe that someone was willing to help him navigate this nightmare. "Marcus," she said suddenly, her voice tight with discovery, "you need to see this." He moved closer, peering over her shoulder at a newspaper article dated 15 years ago. The headline read, "Federal Prosecutor Dies in Car Accident." Below it was a photograph that made Marcus's blood run cold, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair, Rebecca Chen, the same name that appeared on dozens of the documents. "She wasn't just any prosecutor," Sarah continued, scrolling through more articles. "She was leading a major investigation into a defense contracting scheme, money laundering, bid rigging, the works. The accident happened 2 weeks before she was supposed to testify before a grand jury." Marcus studied the files again, seeing them with new clarity. Rebecca Chen hadn't just been collecting evidence. She'd been building an airtight case that would have brought down some very powerful people who clearly had no qualms about making problems disappear permanently. "Look at this," Sarah said, pointing to a handwritten note tucked between 2 bank statements. "It's addressed to someone named David. If something happens to me, make sure these see the light of day. The truth matters more than our safety." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. David Chen. He'd known a David Chen once, back when his life had structure and purpose, back when he wore a badge and believed in justice. David had been a fellow detective, one of the few who'd supported Marcus during his final disastrous case. They'd lost touch after Marcus's world imploded, but the connection couldn't be coincidental. "You know him," Sarah said, reading his expression. "This David, you know him." Marcus nodded slowly. "Detective David Chen. We worked together years ago. If Rebecca was his wife..." He trailed off, the implications washing over him. David's wife had died in what everyone believed was an accident. David had taken bereavement leave and never seemed quite the same when he returned. Now Marcus understood why. "We have to find him," Sarah said. If Rebecca hid this evidence before she died, David might be the key to understanding how to use it. It's not that simple. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, memories he'd tried to bury clawing their way to the surface. David and I didn't exactly part on good terms. After my partner was killed and everything went to hell, he tried to help me. Tried to get me to see someone, deal with the trauma properly. I pushed him away, pushed everyone away. The weight of his past mistakes pressed down on him. He'd been so consumed by grief and guilt after Tommy's death that he'd burned every bridge, destroyed every relationship that might have anchored him to his former life. David had been one of the last to give up on him. People change, Sarah said gently, and if his wife died because of what's in these files, he deserves to know the truth. A car engine rumbled in the distance, and Marcus immediately tensed, moving to the broken window to scan the street. False alarm, just a delivery truck passing by. But the moment of paranoia reminded him how precarious their situation remained. The men who'd killed for these documents weren't going to stop hunting just because he'd found a temporary hiding spot. Even if David helps us, Marcus said, what then? We're talking about people with enough power and resources to kill a federal prosecutor and make it look like an accident. They have money, connections, probably people in law enforcement. What chance do we have? Sarah's fingers moved across the keyboard, bringing up another document, because Rebecca Chen was smart. Look at this. She didn't just collect evidence of the original crimes. She documented the cover-up, the investigation into her own work that was mysteriously shut down, the reassignment of key personnel. She knew they were coming for her, so she made sure to gather everything. Marcus leaned closer, studying the meticulous documentation. Rebecca Chen had been building more than a case. She'd been constructing a nuclear bomb that could level the entire conspiracy. No wonder they'd killed her for it. The question is, Sarah continued, are we brave enough to light the fuse? Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, promising rain. Marcus thought about Tommy, about David, about a dead prosecutor who'd tried to do the right thing. For the first time in years, he felt something other than despair settling in his chest. It felt dangerously like hope. The abandoned textile factory loomed against the pre-dawn sky like a monument to forgotten industry. Marcus pressed himself against the rusted chain-link fence, watching Chen's men position themselves around the perimeter. 3 vehicles, 8 men he could count, all armed. The odds weren't in his favor, but they never had been. His burner phone buzzed. Chen's voice crackled through the speaker. You see how serious I am, Mr. Webb. Now, shall we discuss terms? Marcus kept his voice steady. I want to see Sarah first. Alive, of course. Bay 7, northwest corner. Come alone and bring what belongs to me. The line went dead. Marcus shouldered the duffel bag containing the flash drives and began his approach. Every step felt like walking toward his own execution, but Sarah's life hung in the balance. He'd already lost everything once. He wouldn't lose her too. The factory's interior was a maze of rusted machinery and broken windows that leaked pale moonlight across the concrete floor. His footsteps echoed despite his attempts at stealth. When he reached Bay 7, Chen emerged from the shadows with 2 armed men flanking him. Sarah sat bound to a metal chair in the center of the space, duct tape across her mouth. Her eyes met his with a mixture of relief and terror. Blood trickled from a cut above her eyebrow, and rage burned in Marcus's chest. Ah, the prodigal son returns, Chen said, his accent barely detectable after years in America. Though you look rather different than in your old FBI photos. The beard suits you. Marcus kept his distance, the duffel bag visible but secure. Let her go. This is between us. Chen laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Between us? Mr. Webb, you destroyed my entire Southeast Asian operation 15 years ago. 43 arrests, including my brother. He died in federal prison because of your investigation. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. Chen's brother, Jimmy Chen, the enforcer who'd been found dead in his cell 3 months into his sentence. Marcus remembered the case file, remembered feeling satisfaction at another criminal off the streets. He'd never considered the ripple effects, the vengeance that might follow. "That was my job," Marcus said. "Your brother chose his path, and you chose yours. Did you really think changing your name, growing a beard, becoming a drunk would make you disappear forever?" Chen circled closer. "I've been looking for you for 8 years. Imagine my surprise when facial recognition software picked you up at that storage facility." Marcus's mind raced. The storage unit had been under surveillance, not because of Viktor Petrov's contents, but because they'd been watching for him. But that raised questions about the timing, about why those particular drives had ended up in that particular unit. "The flash drives," Marcus said. "They're not random, are they? You put them there." Chen's smile widened. "Very good, Agent Webb. Still sharp, despite the years of self-destruction." "Yes, those drives contain very specific information. Financial records, shipping manifests, personnel files, everything needed to rebuild what you destroyed." "And Petrov?" Convenient patsy. He thought he was stealing industrial secrets for a quick payday. He had no idea he was carrying my resurrection. Chen gestured to one of his men, who moved closer to Sarah. "But then he died before I could retrieve my property, and the storage unit went to auction. Unfortunate, but not insurmountable." Sarah made muffled sounds behind the tape, struggling against her restraints. Marcus fought every instinct to rush toward her. "Here's what's going to happen," Chen continued. "You're going to give me those drives. Then you're going to disappear again, and this time you'll stay disappeared. Consider it professional courtesy, one player to another. And Sarah? Collateral damage, I'm afraid. She's seen too much, knows too much. But her death will be quick. A mercy, really." Marcus felt the familiar cold calculation of his former life settling over him like an old coat. The factory's layout, sightlines, structural weaknesses. His trained mind catalogued every detail while his hands slowly reached for the duffel bag's zipper. "You made one mistake, Chen," he said, pulling out what appeared to be the black flash drive case. "What's that? You assumed I came alone." The first gunshot shattered a window 50 feet away, deliberate and loud. Chen's men spun toward the sound as Marcus dove behind a support pillar, clutching the drive case. Detective Rivera's voice echoed through the factory from a concealed position. "LAPD. Building is surrounded." Chen shouted orders in rapid Mandarin as his men scattered for cover. Marcus used the confusion to angle toward Sarah, staying low behind the machinery. More shots rang out. Warning shots, he hoped, designed to create chaos rather than casualties. But Chen was already moving, gun drawn, heading straight for Sarah's chair. "Wrong move, Agent," Chen called out. "Now everyone dies." Marcus broke from cover, running full sprint across the open floor as Chen raised his weapon toward Sarah's head. The abandoned warehouse Marcus had chosen sat like a concrete tomb in the industrial district, its broken windows staring blindly at the Detroit skyline. Tommy adjusted the duffel bag on his shoulder, feeling the weight of Sarah's evidence pressing against his spine. 3 days had passed since they'd fled the motel, 3 days of moving through the city's forgotten spaces like ghosts. "You sure about this?" Sarah whispered, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands trembled. Whether from cold or fear, Tommy couldn't tell. He studied the building's perimeter one final time. No movement, no vehicles that didn't belong. The meeting location Marcus had specified in his cryptic phone message seemed secure enough, but Tommy's instincts screamed warnings he couldn't ignore. Every shadow could hide a sniper, every corner could conceal death. "As sure as I can be about anything anymore," he replied, checking his watch. 11:50 p.m. Marcus would arrive in 10 minutes, assuming he was still alive. They slipped through a gap in the chain-link fence, their footsteps crunching on broken glass and debris. The warehouse interior stretched before them, empty except for rust-stained pillars and the skeletal remains of old machinery. Tommy led Sarah to a position behind a concrete support beam that offered clear sightlines to all entrances while providing cover. "If this goes bad," he said, pressing a small pistol into her hands. "Don't hesitate. These people have already proven they'll kill anyone who gets in their way." Sarah's fingers wrapped around the weapon with surprising familiarity. "You're not the only one with secrets, Tommy. I didn't survive 3 tours as a war correspondent by accident." Before he could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed through the cavernous space. Marcus emerged from the shadows, but he wasn't alone. 2 figures flanked him, their faces hidden beneath dark hoods. Tommy's hand moved instinctively to his weapon. "Easy," Marcus called out, his voice carrying across the empty space. "They're with me. Insurance, you might say." As they approached, Tommy recognized one of Marcus's companions, Detective Rivera, the cop who'd been investigating the storage unit murders. The other remained a stranger, an older man with silver hair and expensive clothing that seemed out of place in the desolate surroundings. "You've caused quite a stir," Rivera said, stopping 20 feet away. "Half the department's looking for you, Tommy. The other half thinks you're already dead." "Close enough on both counts," Tommy replied, not moving from cover. "What's the play here, Marcus?" The silver-haired stranger stepped forward. "My name is Jonathan Carmichael. I represent certain interests that would very much like to resolve this situation quietly and peacefully." Tommy felt Sarah tense beside him. She recognized the name. He could see it in the way her grip tightened on the pistol. Carmichael was mentioned several times in the documents they'd studied, always in connection with off-the-books operations and classified weapons programs. "Let me guess," Sarah said, emerging slightly from cover. "You want your stolen research back, no questions asked, and in return we get to walk away with our lives?" Carmichael smiled, but the expression never reached his eyes. "Ms. Chen, your reputation for directness precedes you. Yes, that's essentially the arrangement I'm proposing. The materials you've acquired belong to projects vital to national security. Their existence in civilian hands represents an unacceptable risk." "Unacceptable to whom?" Tommy demanded. "The families of the test subjects who died? The soldiers who were experimented on without consent? Or just unacceptable to the people who've been covering it up for 30 years? "Idealism is a luxury you can't afford," Rivera interjected. "Do you have any idea how many people have died since this started? How many more will die if this information goes public? Sometimes the greater good requires difficult choices." Tommy studied the detective's face, searching for any sign of the man he'd once trusted. "Is that what you told yourself when you started taking their money, Rivera? When you decided to look the other way?" "I've never taken a dime," Rivera snapped. "But I've seen what happens when operations like this get exposed. Chaos, panic. People get hurt who don't deserve it." Carmichael raised a hand, calling for calm. "Gentlemen, we're here to find a solution, not relitigate the past. Mr. Hayes, you have 48 hours to return the materials. In exchange, you and MS Chen will receive new identities and relocation assistance. Clean slate, fresh start. And if we refuse," Sarah asked, "then you'll discover that there are fates worse than homelessness," Carmichael replied, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "You've already seen what my associates are capable of. Don't mistake this offer for weakness." Tommy felt the walls closing in around them. Every option led to a dead end. Every choice carried consequences he wasn't prepared to accept. But as he looked at Sarah, seeing the determination burning in her eyes despite their desperate circumstances, he realized that some fights were worth having regardless of the odds. "We need time to discuss your offer," he said finally. Carmichael checked his watch. 24 hours then. After that, other methods become necessary. The 3 men melted back into the shadows, leaving Tommy and Sarah alone with their impossible choice. The abandoned warehouse on the east side felt like stepping into a tomb. Marcus followed Elena through the rusted doorway, his senses on high alert despite his exhaustion. The flashlight beam cut through dusty air thick with the smell of decay and forgotten time. Their footsteps echoed off concrete walls tagged with graffiti that told stories of urban desperation. "This way," Elena whispered, leading him past towers of moldering cardboard boxes toward a makeshift office in the corner. She'd changed since their escape from the motel. Gone was the composed federal agent, replaced by someone who moved with the paranoid efficiency of the hunted. Marcus couldn't shake the image of Kozlov's men swarming the parking lot. They'd barely made it out through the bathroom window before the bullets started flying. Now Elena sat across from him on an overturned crate, her laptop balanced precariously on a wooden spool that served as a table. "Tell me about Cyprus," she said without preamble. The words hit him like a physical blow. Marcus felt his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. "That's not relevant to—" "Everything's relevant now." Elena's fingers flew across the keyboard. "I've been digging deeper into James Crawford's background, and your name keeps appearing in classified reports from 2018. Reports that officially don't exist." Marcus stared at the laptop screen, watching encrypted files populate faster than he could read them. His throat felt like sandpaper. "You don't have clearance for those files." "I don't have clearance for a lot of things I'm doing right now." Elena turned the laptop toward him. "Operation Nightingale. Ring any bells?" The room seemed to tilt. There it was, the mission designation he'd spent 4 years trying to forget. Marcus closed his eyes, but the memories rushed back anyway. The Mediterranean sun burning his neck as he watched the compound through binoculars, the weight of the rifle in his hands, the face in his crosshairs that he'd never been able to erase. "Crawford was your handler," Elena continued relentlessly. "You were the designated marksman for a Black Ops elimination team. The target was Dmitry Kozlov. We missed." The words came out as barely a whisper. Intelligence was bad. Kozlov wasn't there. But someone else was. Marcus opened his eyes and met her gaze. In that moment, he saw that she already knew the truth. The files on her screen contained surveillance photos, mission reports, classified debriefings. His entire past laid bare in digital black and white. "His daughter," Marcus said, "Anya Kozlova, 15 years old." The warehouse fell silent except for the distant drip of water somewhere in the darkness. Elena waited, letting the weight of the confession settle between them. "The shot was clean," Marcus continued, his voice hollow. "Perfect conditions, clear line of sight. But she walked into the room at the wrong moment, walked right into the bullet meant for her father." Elena's expression softened slightly. "That's why you disappeared, why you ended up on the streets." Crawford tried to cover it up. "Classified everything under national security protocols. But I couldn't." Marcus rubbed his face with shaking hands. "I couldn't live with what I'd done. So I ran, gave up everything, my career, my identity, my life. And now Kozlov knows you're alive." Marcus nodded grimly. "The storage unit wasn't random inheritance. Crawford left it for me specifically, knowing that eventually Kozlov would track me down. It's bait." Elena pulled up another file. "Look at this. Crawford's final operation before his death involved infiltrating Kozlov's money laundering network. He'd been building a case for months, gathering evidence. Evidence that's now in our possession." "Exactly. And here's the part that's really interesting. Crawford wasn't working alone. He had a partner inside the bureau, someone who's been feeding him intelligence about ongoing investigations." Marcus leaned forward. "A double agent. More like a triple agent, someone playing all sides." Elena's fingers paused over the keyboard. "Marcus, I think Crawford discovered that his partner was actually working for Kozlov. I think he was murdered to keep him quiet." The implications hit Marcus like a freight train. If Elena was right, then Kozlov had people inside the FBI, people who knew their every move, their safe houses, their operational protocols, people who could track them anywhere they tried to hide. "We can't trust anyone," he said. "That's what I'm afraid of." Elena closed the laptop with a soft click. "But we have one advantage. Kozlov thinks you're just a homeless man who stumbled into something over his head. He doesn't know you're military trained." Marcus felt something stirring inside him. Not quite hope, but something harder. Something he'd buried along with his guilt 4 years ago. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we stop running." Elena's eyes glinted in the dim light. "Crawford left us those files for a reason. He wanted us to finish what he started. Outside, thunder rumbled across the city. Through the broken windows, Marcus could see storm clouds gathering on the horizon, heavy with the promise of rain. Marcus crouched behind the rusted dumpster, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid night air. Through the chain-link fence, he could see the storage facility's main building, its windows glowing like amber eyes in the darkness. 2 black SUVs sat in the parking lot, engines running. They weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Police won't listen. They say we need evidence. Be careful." Evidence. He almost laughed at the bitter irony. He had enough evidence in that storage unit to bring down half of Washington's defense establishment, but getting anyone to believe him was another matter entirely. The documents Elena had compiled painted a picture so vast and corrupt that it seemed like fiction. Weapons deals with terrorist organizations, the deliberate destabilization of foreign governments, assassination contracts written on official letterhead. But Elena was dead because of what she'd uncovered, and Marcus knew he'd be next if they caught him. He checked his watch, 2:47 a.m. The facility's security guard made his rounds every hour, like clockwork. Marcus had been watching for 3 nights, learning the pattern. The guard would emerge from the main building at 2:50, walk the perimeter, then return by 3:15. That gave Marcus a narrow window. The weight of Elena's pistol pressed against his ribs. He'd never killed anyone, not even during his military service, despite what his record claimed. That fabricated incident had destroyed his career, his marriage, his life. Now he understood it had been orchestrated by the same people who'd killed Elena when she got too close to the truth. Movement in the shadows caught his eye. 3 figures approached the storage unit from the east side, moving with military precision. Marcus recognized the lead figure even in the darkness. Vincent Morrison, Elena's former handler, and the man who'd orchestrated Marcus's downfall 15 years ago. Marcus's jaw clenched. Morrison looked exactly the same, tall, silver-haired, moving with the confidence of a man who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. Marcus had once respected him, had even considered him a mentor. That was before he learned that Morrison had been feeding intelligence to the highest bidder, using his position to eliminate anyone who threatened his network. The 3 men reached Unit 247. Morrison spoke quietly into a radio while his companions began working on the lock. They moved efficiently, professionally. These weren't thugs, they were operators. Marcus knew he had minutes before they discovered the unit was empty. He'd moved the contents 2 days ago, anticipating this moment. Everything was now hidden in 3 separate locations across the city, with copies of the most damaging documents uploaded to a dozen different secure servers. If something happened to him, Sarah had instructions to release everything. But he needed Morrison alive. The man was the key to unraveling the entire conspiracy. Marcus circled wide, using the shadows between the storage units as cover. His homeless lifestyle had taught him to move quietly, to be invisible when necessary. He approached from the south, staying low. Morrison's voice drifted through the night air. "It's empty. Sweep the surrounding units. Check the manifest. Maybe we have the wrong number." "No, sir," one of the men replied. "This is definitely it. Someone beat us here." Morrison's curse was sharp and creative. The vagrant. He must have figured out what he had. A pause then put out the word. "I want him found tonight. And this time, no mistakes." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. These people had resources he couldn't match: surveillance networks, corrupt officials, unlimited funding. He was just one man with a grudge and a bag full of dangerous secrets. The security guard's flashlight bobbed in the distance, beginning his rounds early. Morrison's team noticed immediately, melting back into the shadows with practiced ease. Marcus seized the moment. He slipped between the storage units, working his way closer to Morrison's position. Through a gap in the metal siding, he could see the man clearly now. Morrison was on his phone, speaking in urgent, clipped sentences. "Yes, I understand the timeline," Morrison was saying. "But the situation has become complicated. We may need to accelerate the Mumbai operation." "No, The documents haven't been recovered yet. Mumbai. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. Elena's files had mentioned something about Mumbai, a planned terrorist attack that would justify a new weapons contract worth billions. If Morrison was moving up the timeline, innocent people were going to die. Marcus drew the pistol, his hand surprisingly steady. He'd spent years planning for this moment, but now that it was here, he felt only a cold, focused calm. The security guard's footsteps echoed off the concrete as he approached their section. Morrison gestured to his men, indicating they should leave. In seconds, they'd disappear into the night, and Marcus might never get another chance like this. He stepped into the open, gun raised. "Hello, Vincent." Morrison spun around, his hand moving toward his jacket, but froze when he saw the weapon aimed at his chest. "Marcus Webb," Morrison said, his voice betraying no surprise. "I wondered when you'd finally work up the courage." The abandoned warehouse on the east side smelled of rust and decay, but Marcus knew it would have to do. He'd moved the contents of the storage unit here 3 days ago, working through the night with a borrowed truck and paranoia as his constant companion. Every shadow could hide an assassin, every distant car engine could signal his doom. Sarah paced between the stacks of boxes, her federal badge catching what little light filtered through the grimy windows. "You realize this is completely outside protocol," she said, though her voice carried more resignation than anger. "I should have called this in the moment you contacted me." "But you didn't." Marcus pulled back a tarp, revealing the documents that had started this nightmare. "Because you know something's wrong. Your own people tried to have me killed. We don't know it was federal agents." "The hell we don't." Detective Rodriguez emerged from behind a shipping container, his service weapon holstered but his hand never far from it. "I ran the plates on that sedan from the apartment shooting. Registered to a shell company with ties to a private military contractor. The same contractor that's been doing off-books work for certain alphabet agencies." Sarah's face went pale. She'd always prided herself on being one of the good ones, believing the Bureau stood for justice. Finding out that elements within her own organization had been corrupted was like discovering her family had been lying to her for years. Marcus spread the photographs across a makeshift table constructed from a sheet of plywood and 2 sawhorses. The images were damning. Politicians shaking hands with known criminals, briefcases full of cash-changing hands, meetings in locations that should have never hosted such conversations. But it was the final set of photos that made Sarah's breath catch. "That's Deputy Director Harrison," she whispered, staring at an image of her superior meeting with a man she recognized from wanted posters. "This can't be real." "Check the metadata," Marcus said grimly. Vincent was thorough. "These aren't doctored." Rodriguez picked up a thick manila folder, scanning its contents. Financial records, communication intercepts, travel logs. This guy built a bulletproof case. No wonder they wanted him dead. He paused, looking at Marcus with something approaching respect. "Question is, what's your connection to all this? Because nobody stumbles into something like this by accident." The question Marcus had been dreading hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. He'd known this moment would come, when his carefully constructed anonymity would crumble like wet cardboard. "My name isn't really Marcus Cole," he said finally. "It's Michael Carson. 22 years ago, I was a military intelligence analyst stationed in Eastern Europe. I discovered evidence of weapons trafficking, American weapons being sold to terrorist organizations by a network that included military officers and intelligence operatives." Sarah lowered herself onto a wooden crate, suddenly understanding. "You tried to blow the whistle." "I tried to do the right thing." The words tasted bitter in his mouth. "Took it up the chain of command, filed reports, followed every protocol. And for my trouble, I got framed for the very crimes I was trying to expose. Court-martialed, dishonorably discharged, and marked for death by the people I'd trusted with my life." "So you disappeared," Rodriguez said. "I had help. There were others who knew the truth, good people who couldn't stomach what was happening. They helped me fake my death and disappear into the homeless community." It's amazing how invisible you can become when society decides you don't matter. A sound outside made all three of them freeze. Rodriguez drew his weapon, moving toward the window with practiced silence. After a tense moment, he relaxed slightly. Just a cat. But we can't stay here much longer. Too exposed. Marcus nodded, but his attention had turned to a detail he'd missed before. Vincent's investigation wasn't just random, it was personal. The man had been tracking the same network that had destroyed Michael Carson's life 2 decades earlier. Somehow, Vincent had connected the dots between the historical crimes and current operations. "There's something else," Marcus said, pulling out a letter he'd found hidden in Vincent's personal effects. "He knew about me. Knew who I really was." The letter was addressed to Michael Carson, also known as Marcus Cole, and dated just a week before Vincent's death. In it, Vincent had written about his investigation, about the network of corruption that spanned decades, and about his plan to expose them all. He'd known the risks, known they would likely kill him, but he'd also known that Marcus was the only person with enough knowledge of the historical crimes to complete the investigation. He set this up, Sarah realized. The storage unit, the inheritance, it was all planned. He needed to get this information to someone who would understand its significance and have nothing left to lose. Marcus felt the weight of Vincent's sacrifice settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. A dead man had reached across time to give him a chance at redemption, at finally exposing the truth that had cost him everything. The question now was whether he had the courage to see it through. The warehouse district felt like a graveyard at 3 in the morning, shadows pooling between industrial buildings like spilled ink. Marcus crouched behind a shipping container, watching the rendezvous point Elena had specified, an abandoned loading dock where freight trains once delivered goods to a city that seemed younger then, more hopeful. His hands trembled as he adjusted the wire Elena had taped to his chest. The adhesive pulled at his skin, a constant reminder of how exposed he was, how many ways this could go wrong. Detective Rodriguez's voice crackled softly in his earpiece. "We're in position. Remember, keep them talking. We need admissions." The storage unit contents were supposedly safe now, locked away in police evidence. But Marcus knew the real prize wasn't the documents or the thumb drives. It was him, the only living witness to 30 years of corruption, the loose thread that could unravel everything. A black sedan materialized from the darkness, headlights cutting through the fog rolling in from the bay. Marcus's chest tightened as he recognized the silhouette emerging from the passenger side, Vincent Torino, older now, but still carrying himself with that predatory grace that had haunted Marcus's nightmares for decades. "Hello, Jackie," Torino called out, using the name Marcus had buried along with his former life. "You've led us quite a chase." Marcus forced himself to stand, stepping into the amber circle cast by a solitary streetlight. "I go by Marcus now. Have for 30 years. Torino smiled, the expression cold as winter steel. "You can change your name, live in gutters, drink yourself half to death, but you can't change what you saw that night. What you know. I know you killed Detective Morrison. I know you've been feeding information to organized crime for 30 years. Marcus's voice carried farther than intended in the empty space. "I know Judge Patterson wasn't the only one on your payroll." "Careful, Jackie. You're walking a very thin line." Torino moved closer, and Marcus caught the bulge of a weapon beneath his coat. "You always were too curious for your own good, even as a rookie asking questions nobody wanted answered." The sedan's engine ticked as it cooled, each sound amplified in the silence. Marcus thought about the life he'd built from nothing, his friendship with Ray, the small kindnesses he'd tried to perform, the redemption he'd been seeking in bottles and back alleys. "Patterson thought he was untouchable," Marcus said, remembering the judge's arrogance during those secret meetings 30 years ago, right up until someone decided he was a liability. Torino's laugh was sharp, bitter. Patterson got greedy, started skimming from accounts that weren't his to touch, made him sloppy, paranoid. Lucky for us, he kept detailed records of everyone else's sins, including yours, including mine. Torino pulled out a pistol, holding it casually at his side. "Which is why we're having this conversation. You disappeared before we could clean up loose ends. Been looking for you ever since." Marcus felt sweat despite the cold air. In his earpiece, Rodriguez's voice was tense. "Keep him talking. We need more names." "Who else?" Marcus asked. "How deep does this go?" "Deeper than you can imagine. Prosecutors, police captains, city council members. Patterson's files were like a spider web, connecting everyone who mattered." Torino raised the gun slightly. "We rebuilt everything after you vanished, made it stronger, more careful. Then you had to go and inherit that storage unit." The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. A clerical error at a storage facility had exposed decades of corruption. Patterson never trusted banks, did he? Kept everything where he could control it. Insurance policies, he called them. Evidence against everyone who worked with us. Everyone who took money, everyone who looked the other way. Torino's eyes glittered in the streetlight, enough to bring down half the city's power structure. Marcus heard movement in the darkness beyond the loading dock, Rodriguez and her team getting into position. He needed to keep Torino focused, distracted. "You killed Ray," Marcus said, letting genuine anger color his voice. "He never hurt anyone." "Collateral damage. You should have stayed dead to the world, Jackie. Should have kept drinking yourself to death in whatever hole you were hiding in." Torino raised the gun, pointing it at Marcus's chest. "Would have been easier for everyone. Maybe, but I'm tired of running." The words surprised Marcus with their truth. He was tired. Tired of hiding, tired of guilt, tired of the weight of secrets he'd carried for 3 decades. Whatever happened next, at least the truth would survive. "Should have thought of that 30 years ago, Torino said, his finger tightening on the trigger. The shot, when it came, was deafening in the enclosed space. Marcus flinched, expecting pain, expecting darkness. Instead, he watched Torino stagger backward, surprise replacing arrogance on his face as police officers emerged from the shadows, weapons drawn, voices shouting commands that echoed off warehouse walls like judgment itself. The abandoned warehouse felt like a tomb, its broken windows casting jagged shadows across the concrete floor. Marcus crouched behind a rusted shipping container, the leather journal pressed against his chest, listening to the footsteps echoing through the cavernous space. 3 sets, maybe 4. They'd found him faster than he'd hoped. His phone buzzed with a text from Detective Sarah Chen, SWAT team en route. 20 minutes out. Stay hidden. 20 minutes might as well be 20 hours. The footsteps were getting closer, and Marcus could hear their voices now. Calm, professional, deadly. "He's here somewhere," a woman's voice called out. The tracker on his phone went dark in this sector. Marcus smiled grimly. He'd crushed the phone 2 blocks away, but apparently they'd figured out his general location anyway. The journal contained everything: financial records, assassination contracts, political blackmail material that went back decades. Senator Patricia Hawthorne's entire criminal empire documented in meticulous detail by someone who'd clearly been planning to use it as insurance. The irony wasn't lost on him. 5 years ago, he'd been the one hunting people in places like this. Different uniform, different cause, same deadly game. A flashlight beam swept across his hiding spot, missing him by inches. Marcus held his breath, every muscle coiled. His military training kicked in automatically: assess threats, identify escape routes, survive at all costs. But this wasn't Afghanistan, and these weren't enemy combatants. These were Americans, probably former military or intelligence themselves, corrupted by money and power. "Marcus Reed," the woman's voice called again, closer now. "We know you're here. You've caused quite a stir, you know. Important people are very unhappy." He recognized the voice now. Patricia Hawthorne herself. She'd come personally to clean up this mess. That meant she was either extremely confident or extremely desperate. Given what he'd read in the journal, probably both. "You were supposed to die 5 years ago," she continued, her voice echoing off the walls. "Tragic PTSD case. Homeless veteran takes his own life. Very sad. Very convenient. But you just had to keep surviving, didn't you? The words hit him like physical blows. They'd orchestrated his downfall, his discharge, everything. The mission that went wrong in Kandahar, the one that cost him his team, his career, his sanity, hadn't been a failure. It had been sabotage. He'd been getting too close to something, asking too many questions about a certain defense contractor that happened to have ties to Hawthorne's committee. Rage flooded through him, hot and pure. His teammates, Rodriguez, Jackson, McKay, they'd died because he'd been marked for elimination. The survivor's guilt that had eaten him alive for years, the drinking, the homelessness, the slow spiral into nothing, all of it orchestrated by the woman now hunting him through this warehouse. The journal, Marcus. That's all we want. Give us the journal, and this ends quietly. You disappear, we disappear, everyone wins. Marcus clutched the leather binding tighter. 20 pages of handwritten notes that could bring down a senator, 3 defense contractors, and half the Pentagon's procurement office. The homeless man whose storage unit he'd inherited, Thomas Kellerman, had been their accountant. He'd kept records of everything, every bribe, every murder, every cover-up. When they'd killed him, they hadn't counted on a bureaucratic mix-up sending his belongings to someone else. Footsteps approached his container. Marcus tensed, ready to move. In the distance, he could hear sirens, Chen's backup arriving early, but they wouldn't reach him in time. A shadow fell across his hiding spot. Marcus looked up to see a man in tactical gear, weapon drawn, looking directly at him. For a split second, they stared at each other. The man was young, probably Marcus's age when he'd first enlisted, just following orders, probably not even knowing the full scope of what they were covering up. "Here," the man called out softly. Marcus exploded into motion, tackling the gunman low and hard. They went down together, the weapons skittering across the concrete. Training took over. Disable, disarm, escape. The man was good, but Marcus had been fighting for his life a lot longer. Gunfire erupted through the warehouse as Marcus rolled behind another container. Bullets sparked off metal, and he heard Hawthorne screaming orders. The sirens were louder now, very close. "Burn it down," Hawthorne shouted. "All of it. No witnesses, no evidence." The smell of gasoline filled the air. They were going to torch the place with him in it, make it look like an accident. Marcus looked at the journal one more time, memorizing the key details, then made his choice. He broke cover, running toward the loading dock as flames began to spread behind him. Bullets chased him across the open space, but he could see the flashing red and blue lights through the broken windows now. Almost there, almost free, almost justice for Rodriguez, Jackson, and McKay. The warehouse door exploded inward just as Marcus reached it. The warehouse echoed with the sound of approaching sirens as Marcus clutched the final piece of evidence, a blood-stained confession letter written in Colonel Westbrook's own hand. Sarah pressed a bandage against the bullet wound in her shoulder, while Detective Chen coordinated with the incoming federal agents over his radio. "It's over," Marcus whispered, more to himself than anyone else. The weight of 3 months living in constant fear finally began to lift from his shoulders. The storage unit that had transformed his life from invisible vagrant to hunted man had ultimately led him back to a truth he'd spent 15 years running from. Sarah winced as she adjusted her position against the concrete pillar. "Your friend Tommy would be proud," she said softly. "You got the bastards who killed him." Marcus nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the confession letter. Westbrook's neat military handwriting detailed not just the cover-up of the Kandahar massacre, but years of systematic corruption that reached into the highest levels of the Pentagon. The storage unit hadn't belonged to some random stranger after all. It had been Tommy's insurance policy, a dead man's switch that had taken 15 years to activate. Detective Chen approached, holstering his weapon. "The Kozlov brothers are in custody. We found enough evidence in their vehicle to connect them to at least 6 murders, including your friend at the shelter." He paused, studying Marcus with newfound respect. "The federal prosecutor wants to meet with you tomorrow. Witness protection is still on the table." "I don't want to disappear anymore," Marcus replied, carefully folding the letter. "I've been invisible for too long." The warehouse doors burst open as FBI agents flooded in, their tactical gear a stark contrast to Marcus's threadbare jacket and worn boots. Special Agent Rivera, whom Marcus had spoken with earlier by phone, made her way through the chaos with purposeful strides. "Mr. Cole," she said, extending her hand, "you've given us enough evidence to bring down a conspiracy that's been operating for over a decade. The Justice Department is prepared to offer you full immunity in exchange for your testimony." Marcus shook her hand, feeling the calluses from years of street survival against her manicured fingers. The contrast reminded him of how far he'd traveled, not in distance but in purpose. What about the other veterans, the ones who were silenced? "Your evidence implicates 15 high-ranking officials in a pattern of retaliation against whistleblowers," Rivera replied. "We'll be reopening every case connected to Kandahar. Those men will finally get justice." As the federal agents processed the scene, Marcus found himself standing alone near the storage unit's scattered contents. The briefcase full of cash that had started this nightmare lay open on the concrete, but the money no longer seemed important. The real treasure had been the truth, Tommy's final gift to the brothers in arms he'd left behind. Sarah joined him, her arm in a makeshift sling. "So what happens now? You're about to become a very wealthy man. The reward money alone—" "The shelter needs a new roof," Marcus interrupted. "And there's a veterans program downtown that could use funding." He smiled for the first time in months. "Amazing how different money looks when you actually have choices about how to spend it." Detective Chen walked over with a steaming cup of coffee from one of the response vehicles. "Thought you might need this. It's going to be a long night of statements and paperwork." Marcus accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping his fingers around the warm cup. Through the warehouse windows, he could see the first hints of dawn painting the sky purple and gold. He'd spent countless mornings watching sunrises from park benches and alley doorways, but this one felt different. This one felt like a beginning rather than just another day of survival. "There's something else," Agent Rivera said, returning with a manila folder. "We traced the storage unit payments. Your friend Tommy had been paying for it out of his disability benefits for 3 years before his death. He left specific instructions with the facility. If anything happened to him, the unit was to go to Marcus Cole." Marcus felt his throat tighten. Even in death, Tommy had been watching out for him. The inheritance hadn't been an accident at all. It had been a carefully planned redemption, a chance for both of them to finally come home from a war that had never really ended. As federal agents continued documenting evidence and paramedics treated Sarah's wound, Marcus stepped outside into the breaking dawn. The city was waking up around him, but for the first time in 15 years, he wasn't worried about where he would sleep that night or where his next meal would come from. The homeless man who had accidentally inherited a stranger's storage unit was gone. In his place stood a veteran who had finally found his way back from the war, carrying with him the truth that would ensure no other soldier would suffer in silence.